So, we are continuing our series on Brené Brown's incredible book. If you haven't yet treated yourself to this, I invite you to, although you don't need it for this series. It's the book called Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection and the Language of Human Experience. And this is part 2. And if you have not yet seen part 1, our conversation from last week, I invite you to do that. And if you watch us regularly, you will notice that we have 2 chairs here. We're mixing things up a bit for this series, and we're going to be continuing the conversation in just a bit. But I want to bring all of us kind of onto the same page. See what I did there? The same page. Okay. In this book series. Yes. Okay, Shannon, all right, fine. So, Brené Brown asserts that we must get really proficient at naming where we are emotionally. So, sort of to kind of bring us all into the same conversation, I talked a little bit about this last week. There's something called emotional granularity. And that is when we learn to have a very nuanced vocabulary and a really comprehensive understanding of our emotions so that we can express ourselves in a way that heightens our spiritual maturity and our connection with one another. And that's really what Brené is bringing to us with this book. And last week, Shelley Walker, who was just up here singing, thank you again, Shelley, for being here and for our conversation last week. It was very rich. We looked at a couple of key topics in Brené's book. We looked at stress and overwhelm. If you remember, we talked about what it was to be in the weeds, or something that Brené calls, when she worked in restaurants, the idea of being blown. I'm just blown, I'm overwhelmed, I need to go out and be by myself for a while, I can't delegate. We also talked about schadenfreude, and this is happening a lot in our culture right now. It's when people feel relief or even celebration at someone else's suffering. The antidote to that, the opposite of that, the spiritual tool to that is Freudenfreude, which is when we move to a place of celebrating other people's successes. So we talked about that last week. We also talked about disappointment and regret and the importance of picking up the phone. So again, if you haven't yet seen the talk from last week, I invite you to check that out and pick up the phone where needed in your life. So there's so much to unpack. There's so much to unpack in this incredible book. It's hard just to choose a few things. And what I've done is I've really looked through each chapter and kind of identified emotions that I believe we have been moving through or feeling during these many 2 years during this pandemic. And also, a couple of things that came up on our community chat, our Zoom community chat last week that came up there. So I brought some of those topics in today as well to serve. And if you don't yet know, if you're watching this live stream in real time, we have a community chat just following this service at 12:15 Pacific time where everyone's invited, and if you're new, it's okay. You don't have to be on camera if you don't want to. You can turn it off or, whatever works for you, but bring your questions. And we can go deeper with this material. So I invite you into that today if that calls to you. So during this series, we are building each week on what we have learned the previous week. And so for this conversation, for this week, I have invited, drum roll please, our Associate Minister, Reverend Masando Hiraoka, to come up and be in this conversation with me. Thank you so much. And Rev M, as you're settling in, I just want to remind everyone, I mentioned this at the top of the service, that everyone here who is not wearing a mask, either singing or speaking, has tested negative this morning, and we are very, very mindful of what is happening, and I just want to let you all know that ahead of time. Yes. So welcome, brother. Isn't this fun?
It's good to be here. This is super fun.
Yeah. I have my notes here because if I don't have my notes, you and I could talk about one topic for like 5 hours.
Yeah, those are like our leash a little bit.
Yes. So I'm gonna be good, and I'm gonna keep us on topic. So So the first thing that popped out to talk about, because it's really, really up for me right now. As you well know, we talk about this all the time. I am just absolutely dedicated to looking at our New Thought teaching for the 21st century, for the next 80 years. How is it evolving right now? And what can we do to help the evolution process of this incredible teaching, a New Thought, this metaphysical teaching of ours? And so it brings me to the chapter on paradox. Paradox. Those of us in New Thought, if you've been in this teaching for a long time, paradox might feel tricky. Even though paradox, it's throughout every single faith tradition, right? You can't have light without shadow. You cannot have enlightenment without seeking, right? And so I want to just read you this quote, and then we'll go to town a little bit on this whole idea of paradox. So Brené Brown writes, "The problem starts when we don't have the skills or experience to tolerate the uncertainty and ambiguity, and we give in to cravings for neat, mutually exclusive categories." Sound familiar? Anywhere? Just wanting to, folks have a tendency to simplify, to want to simplify. And Brené asks, can two seemingly contradictory thoughts both be true?
Yeah.
Welcome to being human. I think this is a really powerful question.
For sure.
So, where does this land for you, my friend, this idea?
It lands in a lot of different spots for me, but if we're talking about it within the context of evolution of our teaching, and I think this is actually up and is a theme all over the movement right now, actually, is spirituality just for ourselves, right? Is it just for personal transformation? Is it just for focusing on how we can make our lives better, how we can suffer less, how we can have a deeper connection with whatever we're considering to be that divine presence in our lives? And I think so many of us come to it that way and have very personal experiences of that.
Yep.
And so there's this thought out there that that's all we should ever be focusing on within these contexts of spiritual community is just ourselves and our personal transformation. We shouldn't be talking or thinking about anything else, right? But what I know is, and what actually created a lot of our connection when I was in ministerial school, is that actually it's only a part of the puzzle.
Right.
And that we can use these same tools that we've utilized for our individual growth and transformation with our society, with our community, with our families, with our world, with the government, with everything that's happening in the world. Actually, the principles are the same. They're fundamentally the same.
Yeah.
But where I think our teaching is growing a lot is actually moving that out into the world and saying, hey, this actually applies out there as well, so why not apply it? Why not take the challenges that we all are, I'm sure, really struggling with is going on in the world and apply the principles that we've already really created for ourselves and utilized for ourselves out there.
Yeah, and I love how you brought in, because our connection was very much, we met in the heart of social justice.
Yes.
As an organizer, you've done right?
And we were ridiculed for it a little bit.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I definitely
fair.
I definitely was questioned, why are you doing this? Why are you focusing on this? When I was in school. And so it was great to have a teacher that was helping me, cultivate it. And I think, it's always felt like the only way forward.
And
right now.
And we've said this a lot in different contexts, talks and classes and all the things, and it's this idea of, the transcendentalists, right? The people that our teaching was, were born out of, Ernest Holmes. Are you kidding me? They would be at the front of social justice, because to me the whole point of this teaching is to do our own work so that we can then bring it out into the world. And I think that sometimes is seen as paradox, and yet it's really where we're headed, and it's an interesting place to be. One of the things that Brené talks about is uncertainty. And embracing uncertainty. And this is connected to that, because you can be in a personal shadow or a really difficult place, and at the same time, know the truth that God is everywhere present, that light is everywhere present, that love is everywhere present, and still really be having a difficult
be in it.
experience and be in that paradox. And one of the things that I think that has struck me is so often we can, the sort of self-help versions of like, leapfrogging those really important feelings.
Or bypassing.
Bypassing, spiritual bypass, we talk about that a lot. I had an experience about, I want to say it was like 8 years ago, that when I read this, I went, oh my gosh, and I'd had an experience that changed my whole interpretation of this teaching and where I believe we're headed. So, many years ago, I was in a class, and I had a student who had been in the teaching a long time, and she had set an intention for herself that she wanted to move her career to the next level. She was in this job, and she wanted to get a promotion. She was ready to do this, and she had been working on all the things that we teach, visioning and affirmations and, just doing all of her work, moving her feet, planting the seeds, doing everything, all the things. And she was in class, and I knew that she'd been working on this for a long time. And she raised her hand, and she was like, what is happening? Why am I not demonstrating this thing that I want? Why is this not happening in my life? I'm doing all the things. Why is this not happening? Shannon, teacher of mine, why is this not happening? And in that moment, I took a deep breath, and I was doing my mental, like checking my boxes, like she's done that, she's done that, she's done that, yep, I know she's done that. And then it was that moment that we're always called into as ministers and clergy and practitioners and laity who if you've been in this teaching long enough. For me, my internal prayer is always, I take a breath, Spirit, give me the courage to get out of my own way so that I can be a vessel for you, for Spirit to move through. And so thankfully I got out of my own way. And in that moment, what came out of my mouth shocked me and everyone in the class. Because she said, why is this not happening? And she was in tears. And I literally, what came out of me was, I do not know. I don't know. And everyone went, oh,
shame.
Right? I don't know, but I know Spirit in you does. And that moment, she literally put her hand on her heart, and she took a breath, and she went, oh, I'm afraid. And she said, I'm afraid that if I get this promotion, nothing is really going to change in my life. And she got to it. And it was like, it was all about connecting to her inner knower and really making that journey from the head to the heart and really, really getting there. So often, in this teaching, we know, I affirm, I know. Well, you know what? There's so much power in not knowing and being open to the mystery, the panentheistic part of our teaching that is mystery that we don't talk enough about. And that is the paradox.
That's the Socratic method.
Yes, 100%, 100%. So, for those of you at home, if that is happening with you, if you are wanting to bring something into your life and it's not happening, I just invite you to get quieter and quieter and quieter and more curious and gentle, and be in that uncertainty. Brené Brown talks about that the uncertainty actually gives us strength if we pay attention to it, instead of turning away from it. So often we're trained to turn away. I feel like often it's the call, rather than turning away from the condition, might actually be turning to it and asking it, what are you here to teach me?
It's most likely why it's showing up. It
Yeah?
has something to communicate,
Yeah?
Or something to usher us through, or something for us to learn in that process.
Yeah.
But if we run away from it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
It's going to just follow us wherever we go,
Right.
most likely.
Right.
And
Right.
so at some point, I think we do, whether we hit rock bottom and we face it, or we
Yes.
choose very consciously to just gently look at
Yes.
that which is disturbing us or making us
Yes.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it's that thing, Shelley and I talked about it a little bit last week. During 2020, we were all at home. We're sort of faced with our emotions. We're faced with feeling them. And I talked about the levels of addiction that rose and the alcohol, consumption and all of that. Because, and I really think it's important to bring it into this conversation and into this teaching that truly we are empowered to sit in the emotion. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
it's temporary,
Yeah,
right? It's not a
exactly.
permanent emotion.
Yes.
But so often we're just like, I'm going to turn away. It's like, that's not going to serve. It's not going to serve. One of the things we turn away from is one of the things that Brene talked about is sadness.
Yeah.
And I learned something new in this. And I love it when I learn something new. I just nerd out, and then I do all the research. I
Yeah.
get so excited. But she talked about in their research that sadness is a requirement for empathy and compassion. That without sadness, we are less empathic and compassionate human beings. And so often what happens is, I don't know about you, the sadness was like, oh, don't be sad, don't be sad.
Yeah, from
Don't
very
be-
young age.
Don't be sad. Here's a tissue, wipe the tears, you know? And it's like, wow, we have an opportunity, and we've all been faced with sadness, I think it's fair to say, you
Yes.
know? I mean, I sat with that, and I was like, whoa. So the next time I am feeling sad, rather than trying to turn away from it, it's such a natural thing. Like,
Oh, I run from sadness.
do you?
Oh, yeah. And I love it. I
Yes.
think that's probably why I like the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, because of the...
The first time I moved here, I think I may have talked about this in talk, it was like all the rain, all the gloomy weather, all like just perhaps it's the green, it just like gave me permission to be sad.
Oh,
And it's
that's
like, yeah, you
so
can be sad.
interesting.
Actually, look, this is a very kind of sad feeling place sometimes. When
Sometimes.
it rains for
It
6
can
weeks
be-
in
yes,
a row like
it
it
can
just
be.
did. It can feel a little gloomy,
Yeah.
but hey, that's not it. Look at all the beauty that it brings. And you don't have to run from it. And actually, there's a place for you to experience that sadness here
Yeah, yeah.
where it can become a gift. And the Pacific Northwest actually taught me about sadness.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
And I
that's
think
so
I
cool.
was I had lived in like Maui, and I was like in all these places, I think running from my sadness quite a bit. I was like going to these happy places, and I was deeply unhappy, and I couldn't have felt more lonely, even though I was like with all my best friends. It's the saddest I felt because I couldn't just feel what I was feeling. But then I moved to the Pacific Northwest, and I was like, oh yeah, I can totally be sad here. Other people feel even kind of sad, but they're still very nice and happy. Like, there's magic here for some reason. And
Yeah.
it gave me something that I still cultivate that. I still appreciate sadness in that way. You know?
I love that. I love that. I'm taking this with me. Like,
Oh, no
this
doubt.
was a big
Forever.
one. Brene, she writes, in our saddest moments, we want to be held by or feel connected to someone who has known that same ache. That's the human need, you know? And so here's my question. Here's my question for you. Are you
Yes.
ready? What is your favorite sad movie?
This is a hard one. But I think the one that I came to, like, there's some sad movies that I'll watch once, and I'm like, I really am glad I watched that. I'm never watching that again.
Yes, it's too sad.
It's too much.
Yeah, I get it.
Like Schindler's List was one of them,
Oh,
right? Like,
yeah, it's hard.
amazing work of
Yes,
art.
yes.
I don't know if I'm going to watch it again. But one that I go back to over and over again because I think it holds this kind of great balance is Up. That movie Up, that animated movie. And there's that montage because the whole premise is that whole movie is actually about grief, right? And you know, the loss of a life partner and this,
Yes.
you know, older, you know, like the main character just like not knowing how to move forward.
Sure, right.
And then, so you know at the beginning, like what the premise is, that he's experienced this loss. And there's this montage, you know, that's like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
It's
I
like, I don't know, 3 or 4
do, I
minutes long, and it
do.
goes through like their whole life together. And I lose it.
Yeah.
Every single time. I just lose it.
Yes.
But I like find myself craving that part of the movie.
Do you?
Like,
Yeah.
I look, that's my favorite part of the movie. Because, yeah, I think it just, I feel so deeply like that loss and the
Yeah.
love that creates the grief from that loss.
Yes, and if
You
you,
know?
so if you don't know that movie, I invite you to watch it
Oh,
because everything you're
amazing.
saying is so. So my favorite sad movie of all time, Terms of Endearment. Oh my God! I think it's because I'm a mom. I don't know. And I think Shirley MacLaine is like she's just channels in that movie. But the thing is that what I loved about Brene lists all the good, sad movies that we watch.
I think she did put Up in there, yeah.
Yeah, yes, except for Up. And did she put
I
Terms
think
of
she did,
Endearment?
actually, yeah.
Did she oh, she did?
Oh, no, I don't think she put
remember.
Terms of Endearment.
Well, all right. Anyway,
Regardless.
the invitation is to notice when you're watching a sad movie, or you're even when you were saying when you're holding space for someone. We were talking about this earlier, that so many times we're called into holding the space for someone who is sad, right? To not rush with the tissue, but to just hold the space. And part of what that experience is, or the experience of watching a sad movie, is we're connecting. We're connecting to the humanity in another person. The whole point of watching a sad movie is we want to be moved.
Yeah.
We want to remember our human connection with another being in all of its complexity.
Yeah.
And sad movies give us permission.
Yeah.
And I think, they give us permission to cry.
Yes.
They give us permission to really feel, and I think that's really huge. And so it's just one of those ways that for you all at home, for you here, the next time you see even a sad commercial, those sad commercials, and you're just like, it's because we're having this moment of human connection, So it's really, really important, and it really gets to the crux of the matter of the conversation of really her entire book. I would synthesize it into one word, and that is connection. That every one of these emotions, either it's connecting with ourselves or it's connecting with each other. I would say connecting with God or Spirit. And one of the spiritual tools that she puts in here is this concept of having a hope practice. And a hope practice, she has a couple of things that she talks about here. She talks about setting realistic goals as a skill set for a prerequisite for hope. Sometimes, if someone says, for example, they want to be, a gazillionaire in a year, right? And so they've set this goal for themselves that is not realistic. It will set them up for disappointment, which then can lead to hopelessness, which then can lead to depression. And she was talking about it's a real skill, create realistic goals for yourself in a skilled way. And I loved that idea, to build it for yourself. And then also we teach us all the time to stay away from self-blame and criticism, and that's a big part of what we teach. But my favorite hope practice that she brings in that I think is really valuable for all of us is this reminder that it's always temporary. That whatever it is temporary. And she's been doing this hope practice for about a year or so. She started during the pandemic, and Brené Brown says that she tries to not sink into fear in any given moment, but when something comes up and she starts to do that, she asks herself the following questions. And I remember it by just holding up my hand 5, because they're all 5s. She asks herself, will this be a big deal in 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 months, or 5 years? Isn't that powerful? Will this be a big deal in 5 minutes, 5 hours? That's a big leap between 5 minutes and 5 hours.
That's not sometimes all it takes is 5 minutes.
Right? 5 days, 5 months, 5 years.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And a family member of mine is moving through a health challenge, and I sat with that question, and I thought to myself, you know what? This is going to be a big deal in 5 years. And can I deal with it in 5 minutes? In this 5 minutes? Yes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I was actually listening to a podcast with Glennon Doyle. We Can Do Hard Things, one of my favorite podcasts
So
right now,
great.
by the way. And she
So
brought
great.
on this Dr. Laurie Santos, who's a professor of psychology at Yale. And she talked about this idea of hedonic adaptation, which is this idea that our brains are kind of dumb in the fact that for really exciting things that happen in our life, that are just fun, we get into Yale, or we get a new phone, or we fall in love, or whatever it is, that eventually that initial hit that you get goes away.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes away really quickly.
Right.
But the same thing is true for things that are hard. When hard things happen in our life, the impact of that, our brain has a resilience, so that impact actually lessens over time.
Yeah.
And that our brains are actually better at adapting to the hard things, then the joyful things.
Isn't that interesting? It's that survival mechanism.
Truly.
Yeah.
There's intelligence there.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
there's
built
intelligence in our biology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah. Yeah. And I think that we can really utilize that in our spiritual teaching through spiritual practices.
No doubt.
You know, and bringing so much of what we're talking about in these conversations is bringing the unconscious conscious.
Yes.
You know, really bringing the unconscious conscious. So I invite you into that hope practice. I think that's a really, really beautiful one. One of the chapters in Brené's book is Places We Go When We Search for Connection, Loneliness. She talks about loneliness, and she writes, at the heart of loneliness is the absence of meaningful social interaction and intimate relationships, friendships, family gatherings, or even community or work group connections. Hello, pandemic.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And one of the things that I, in her study of shame, she talks a lot about how historically, one of the other things, kind of like sadness, being taught to turn away from sadness, is being taught sort of societally to be ashamed of feeling lonely.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that we get to step out of that. That's where the term loner comes from, and it's associated with sort of, you know, definitely in the past, but like criminal behavior, you know, loner kind of thing, and we all feel lonely, and the antidote to that, the spiritual tool for that is connection.
Yeah.
Is once again connection, and one of the things that struck me is that just being here today, you know, the few of us that are here, yeah, but also those of you online, we are in community, and therefore we are experiencing connection. It's the antidote to loneliness. If you look at any kind of spiritual faith path where people gather, monasteries and ashrams and, you know, churches and classes, and, you know, the greatest spiritual growth that we have internally often happens side by side with someone, and not even necessarily knowing it, but being in community and having this incredible sort of vulnerable experience, this willingness to grow together. You're having your whole inner monologue right now as I'm talking, and all of you are having your own experiences as we're talking. And what you're maybe, I hope, having some ahas about these topics, right? But you're not sharing that with each other in a constant conversation. We're just having this collective experience. And so it's this idea of connection is the antidote to loneliness. Yeah. And being in spiritual community is one of the best places to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I love in the book how she talks about, like, listen, loneliness is just our body's response, yes, right? Just like hunger is our body's response, you know, to being hungry. Yes. Thirst. Yes. Like, loneliness is just our body's response to where we're saying, like, you need to go and have some social connection.
Yes.
Because it's not just good for, like, spiritual growth, it's just good for being
Absolutely.
human, like being alive.
Absolutely.
It's something that exists within us to let us know, like, yeah, you need a little bit more of this. Just like, go drink some water, go eat some food,
yes,
go make a connection.
Yes.
It's all the same. It's not like something that's like something that's wrong with us ever.
Right.
It's just information that our body and our brain and our hearts just communicating with us in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful. One of our community members shared in a Zoom chat last week that they were very, very lonely. And it was this moment of it was so interesting to observe, because what I felt collectively was, first of all, their courage in saying that, and that shouldn't even be a courageous thing to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know? Yeah. Let's just let's take, you know, the muck off of it. Yeah. And just be like, I am lonely, I need some connection, let's do this thing. Yeah. You know, Zoom, call, whatever we can do right now. But like, it's, you know, we have these spiritual growth circles in our community, and it's a beautiful way every Wednesday night. You know, if you haven't yet joined a spiritual growth circle, you might go on our website and look into that. It's a way to connect, you know, in spiritual community in a deep way, and connection is huge. Again, kind of going back to that. You know, the sort of the last thing that I wanted to bring in today, because it's so important to me personally, it's Brené's chapter on places we go when the heart is open, love. goes to this place of love. And, love is my word for God. And I have a very long relationship with the word love. When I was about 13 or so, I noticed, my grandmother Eileen, I'm Shannon Eileen, my grandmother Eileen, my dad's mom, was just like my hero, just one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my entire life ever. And I noticed something in my family unit with, my mom and dad and all my little brothers and sisters. We said, I love you all the time. It was just like, okay, I love you. But I noticed when my Grams Eileen, that's what we called her, Grams Eileen, when they wouldn't say I love you. And I remember one time noticing this, and the little rebel in me went, I love you, Grams. I love you. And she went, yes. And I was like, what is that? I went to my dad and I said, Dad, how come Grams doesn't tell me she loves me? And he said, we just didn't say that in our family growing up. We showed love by action. We just didn't say that word. Well, I sat with that and I was like, I'm on a mission. And so every single time my grandmother would visit and she would leave, I would take a deep breath and she would be at the door and I would hug her and I would look her in her eyes and I would say, I love you. And she would go, And this went on for about 2 or 3 years until finally, I will never forget, I was in our backyard and I did it again. And I said, Grams, I love you. And she looked right at me and she goes, you know what? I love you too. And I felt God in that moment. I felt spirit in that moment. And I, from then on, made the decision that I was going to make certain that everyone in my life knew that I loved them in that way.
Yeah.
Not like, I love you, bye. But like, it took her years to work up the courage, and I realized the weight of the word when she said it to me. And, when I went to college, we became pen pals, and we would always sign our letters back and forth. I love you, Shannon Eileen. I love you, Grams Eileen. And that was something that we did. And I find that often, depending on where I am, you all hear me, I say it you are loved. It's a commitment of mine. It's a spiritual practice of mine. And I find that oftentimes at first it can throw people, depending. And I love how Brené Brown kind of debunks the love, the idea of the emotion of love. She writes, we cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. So how does this land with you?
Well, I'm chuckling still by the fact that like you being a rebel is saying I love you. It's like the most Reverend Shannon thing ever. Oh my God, it's hilarious to me. But I mean, I think growing up in as a male in a culture that values toxic masculinity, I think this is especially hard. Right? And I think my family says I love you a lot, but I think where I saw this was with my guy friends. Right?
Yes.
Like how difficult it was to say that. And how we're navigating this culture to where like one of the truest things that we could probably say about like our dear friend, that a lot of whom like we've known since when we were 4 or 5 years old, I still keep in touch with my childhood friends. That, for a while it was really hard to say, I love you to your guy friends, And I struggle with that. Like when you say I love you, like when I first started working here, I was like I couldn't move. I was just like, okay, bye. Because it's confronting to really take it in. And I don't think I'm someone who has been taught how to do that. So it's something I've had to learn over time. It's something that, we just like, love you, dude, or love you, man. And, eventually it just became natural and not something that we struggle with anymore to express our love for each other as friends. But it took time and practice to do that. And so, I think we're battling against that in many ways, like just a culture that like doesn't know how to talk about love, or love is just this weird romantic kind of love, and you know we still have so much to learn about love and about the power of love and about the cost of love and the risks of love, and you know for me that's part of the spiritual path. Like if God is love, then learning about love is learning about God, and learning about love is learning about ourselves and how we interact with each other.
Yes.
And the more that we can be confronted by it, changed by it, more willing to express it,
Yes.
more willing to receive it. Maybe that's the hardest thing. Maybe that's even harder than expressing it.
There.
Um,
That's
maybe
interesting.
that's probably the when you say I love you and I'm like, oh God, that's
Yes,
what that is
yes,
probably.
yes,
It's like
yes.
that awkward feeling, like, oh, do I say it back? Do I
Yeah,
do?
no,
Or just like let it. Just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I totally remember one of our first meetings talking about you working here, and we were on, and I just was like, I love you, and I remember because it's just how I can't not. That's just it, you know, and I knew. I knew that it was me being me, and it was such a beautiful moment though, because I remember seeing you go like, oh, that's how it is here. Like I remember like feeling that and seeing that, and
Yeah.
then I remember you being so just so beautifully brave and courageous and growing into that and being the first one to say that to a small group of people, and it was like. You know, because you do men's work, you literally do the work on you know toxic masculinity and
dismantling the stuff.
dismantling all of it, and it's been beautiful to to see that, and sometimes I am, depending on what circles I'm in, I have to take a deep breath, and I know that it's going to be confronting, and it's why I do it. And yes, it's the rebel,
It's the rebel in
me.
you.
But it's been really beautiful to see that in you, and
Thanks.
because I know that you're bringing that to our men's group. I know that you're bringing that to your group of friends, you know, because it's a powerful thing, you know. To express love is to be courageous.
Yes.
And yeah, and we're here to be courageous.
Yes, indeed.